Right now, at this exact moment, commercial satellite imagery providers have detected something that defense analysts are calling unprecedented. Iran has moved Russian-made S-400 air defense systems to forward positions along the Persian Gulf coast, positioning these weapons within striking distance of every major American military installation in the region. The Pentagon issued a terse statement confirming awareness of the deployments. Iran's Ministry of Defense released imagery showing the systems operational, claiming they represent defensive measures against American aggression. This is the first time Russia's most advanced air defense technology has been deployed to the Gulf region during a period of active diplomatic negotiations, fundamentally altering the strategic calculus for any potential American military action against Iranian nuclear facilities. Let me walk you through exactly what happened and why this changes everything. On March 6, 2026, at approximately 1,430 hours local time, analysts at Maxar Technologies identified unusual convoy activity departing from Iran's Bushehr province. The convoys consisted of at least 12 heavy transport vehicles moving south toward coastal positions. By March 7th at 0820 hours, Planet Labs imagery confirmed the arrival of distinctive S-400 components at 3 separate locations: a position 47 kilometers north of Bandar Abbas, a second site near Bandar Linja, and a third installation on Caption Island at the narrowest point of the Strait of Hormuz. Each location showed the characteristic deployment pattern of S-400 systems, including 48 N-6 missile launchers, 92 N-6 gravestone engagement radars, and 91 N-6 Big Bird acquisition radars. By March 8th at 1,200 hours, all 3 systems appeared operational based on radar emissions detected by signals intelligence platforms. Iran's Ministry of Defense posted photographs on March 8th showing Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei visiting what they identified as a newly operational air defense site, though the specific location was not disclosed. The Pentagon acknowledged the deployments on March 9th, with Central Command spokesperson Colonel Michael Andrews stating only that "We are aware of Iranian air defense movements and continue monitoring the situation." What makes this deployment extraordinary is the timing. Just 72 hours earlier, American and Iranian diplomatic representatives concluded preliminary talks in Muscat, Oman, aimed at de-escalating tensions over Iran's nuclear program. Those talks were described by both sides as productive, with follow-up sessions tentatively scheduled for late March. The deployment of advanced Russian air defense systems during an active diplomatic process represents either calculated strategic signaling or a complete breakdown in Iranian civilian military coordination. To understand why these deployments matter so profoundly, you need to understand what the S-400 actually is and what it can do. The S-400 Triumph, designated SA-21 Growler by NATO, represents Russia's most capable long-range air defense system currently in operational service. This is not an incremental upgrade over previous systems. The S-400 can simultaneously track 300 targets and engage 36 of them at ranges up to 400 kilometers depending on missile variant. The system employs 4 different missile types optimizing for different target sets. The 40 N-6 missile reaches 400 kilometers engaging high-altitude targets, including AWACS aircraft and tankers. The 48 N-6 missile maxes out at 250 kilometers, targeting fighter aircraft and cruise missiles. The 9M96E2 provides 120-kilometer range with exceptional maneuverability, defeating stealth aircraft and precision-guided munitions. The 9M96E offers 40-kilometer range, specializing in close-range interception of low-flying threats. What makes the S-400 genuinely threatening to American air operations is the engagement envelope. At 400 kilometers, these systems positioned along Iran's southern coast can engage aircraft over international waters in the Persian Gulf, over Saudi Arabian territory, over United Arab Emirates airspace, and over portions of southern Iraq where American forces operate. An American F-35 launching from Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE would enter S-400 engagement range before even crossing into Iranian airspace. The system's 30-kilometer altitude ceiling means it can engage everything from low-flying cruise missiles to high-altitude bombers. The 92N6 Gravestone engagement radar operates in X-band, providing targeting quality tracks resistant to most electronic countermeasures. The system's mobility represents another critical advantage. Each S-400 battalion can displace from one position to another in approximately 5 minutes once the decision is made to move, making these systems extremely difficult to target with anything except ballistic missiles or hypersonic weapons that can strike faster than the system can relocate. Iran's previous air defense inventory consisted primarily of aging S-200 systems from the 1960s with 200-kilometer range, Chinese-made HQ-9 systems with 125-kilometer range, and domestically produced Bavar 373 systems that Iran claims match S-400 capabilities, but Western intelligence assesses as significantly less capable. The introduction of actual Russian S-400 systems represents a generational leap in Iranian integrated air defense capabilities. The strategic implications of these deployments extend far beyond pure military capability assessment. This represents the most visible manifestation yet of deepening Russian-Iranian military cooperation following the Ukraine conflict. Russia and Iran signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement in December 2025, but intelligence communities assessed that agreement as primarily covering economic cooperation, drone technology transfers, and diplomatic coordination. The deployment of S-400 systems indicates the military dimension of that partnership has advanced far more rapidly than Western intelligence services anticipated. According to Dr. Michael Kaufman, director of Russian studies at the Center for Naval Analyses, the transfer of S-400 systems to Iran during active tensions with the United States represents a significant escalation in Russian willingness to directly complicate American military options in the Middle East. This isn't just about Iranian air defense. This is Russia creating strategic costs for American regional presence. The question of how these systems arrived in Iran without detection earlier raises troubling intelligence gaps. S-400 components are massive. The 48N6 missiles measure over 7 meters long. The radar systems require specialized transport vehicles. The complete system for one battalion includes over 20 separate vehicles. How did this equipment move from Russia to Iran without Western intelligence detecting the transfer? 3 possibilities exist. First, the systems may have been pre-positioned in Iran months ago and only recently deployed to operational sites. Second, they may have been transported via Caspian Sea shipping routes that receive less satellite surveillance than Persian Gulf or Arabian Sea routes. Third, they may have been delivered overland through Armenia and Azerbaijan using rail networks that avoid major transportation corridors. Each scenario indicates significant intelligence blind spots in monitoring Russian-Iranian military cooperation. From Tehran's perspective, these deployments serve multiple strategic functions. First, they complicate American strike planning against Iranian nuclear facilities. Any American air campaign would now need to allocate significant resources to suppressing or destroying these S-400 systems before other operations could proceed. That requirement increases the complexity, duration, and resource demands of any potential strike package. Second, they demonstrate to domestic Iranian audiences that the regime possesses credible defenses against American military power. Following months of internal unrest and economic pressure from sanctions, the Iranian government needs to project strength and capability. Third, they signal to regional adversaries, particularly Israel and Saudi Arabia, that Iranian airspace has become significantly more dangerous for military operations. The deployments also reveal Iranian strategic calculations about diplomatic negotiations. By deploying these systems during active talks, Iran signals that diplomatic engagement does not equal military vulnerability. This follows classic deterrence logic, where capability demonstration during negotiations strengthens bargaining position by making clear that cooperation represents choice rather than necessity. From Washington's perspective, these deployments create an acute dilemma. American military planners have spent decades developing operational plans for strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. Those plans assumed Iranian air defenses consisted of aging Soviet systems supplemented by less capable indigenous production. The presence of S-400 systems fundamentally changes the calculus. To understand the specific military challenge, consider the geography. American forces in the region include approximately 35,000 personnel across multiple installations. The largest concentration sits at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, hosting Central Command Forward Headquarters and significant air assets. Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE hosts F-35 stealth fighters and tanker aircraft. Naval Support Activity Bahrain provides headquarters for the 5th Fleet. Multiple Army and Special Operations installations exist across Kuwait, Jordan, and eastern Saudi Arabia. All of these facilities now sit within S-400 engagement range from Iranian territory. This means American aircraft cannot operate freely even over Allied territory without risk of engagement by Iranian systems firing from Iranian airspace. The strategic response options available to American planners have become significantly more complicated and costly. Let me explain the deterrence theory framework that makes these deployments so strategically significant. In classic deterrence theory, credible defense capabilities serve two functions. First, they increase the cost an adversary must pay to achieve military objectives, potentially making those objectives not worth pursuing. Second, they demonstrate resolve and capability, strengthening bargaining position in negotiations by proving that concessions come from choice rather than weakness. Iran's S-400 deployments achieve both functions simultaneously. According to Dr. Caitlin Talmadge, professor of security studies at Georgetown University and author of The Dictator's Army, advanced air defense systems like the S-400 don't necessarily need to shoot down large numbers of aircraft to be strategically effective. They simply need to impose significant costs and complications on adversary planning. If American planners must now allocate substantial resources to suppressing Iranian air defenses before conducting other operations, that changes the entire operational timeline, increases the force requirements, and raises the threshold for deciding to use military force in the first place. This connects to broader escalation ladder dynamics. Military strategists conceptualize conflict escalation as a series of rungs on a ladder. Each rung represents increased level of military confrontation. Lower rungs include diplomatic protests, economic sanctions, and proxy conflicts. Middle rungs include limited military strikes, no-fly zones, and maritime interdiction. Upper rungs include large-scale conventional war, attacks on leadership targets, and ultimately nuclear escalation. The S-400 deployments move Iran several rungs up the escalation ladder. Previously, American military options against Iran included relatively limited strike packages targeting specific nuclear facilities with minimal collateral damage and rapid execution. The presence of advanced air defenses means any strike package must now include extensive suppression of enemy air defense operations, potentially requiring multiple days of sustained combat operations rather than a single night of precision strikes. This shifts the character of potential conflict from surgical strike to sustained air campaign, crossing a psychological and political threshold that makes military action significantly less likely to receive political authorization. Historical precedents illuminate how air defense capabilities alter strategic dynamics. During the 1991 Gulf War, Iraq's Soviet-era air defense network included S-75 and S-125 systems broadly similar to Iran's pre-S-400 inventory. The American-led coalition spent the first 3 weeks of Operation Desert Storm systematically destroying Iraqi air defenses before beginning strikes against other target sets. Despite Iraqi air defenses being significantly less capable than S-400 systems, the suppression campaign required over 2,000 sorties and resulted in 38 aircraft losses. A campaign against S-400 systems would require substantially greater resources and time. Another relevant comparison comes from Syria. Russia deployed S-400 systems to Syria in late 2015 following Turkey's shoot-down of a Russian aircraft. Those systems created de facto exclusion zones around Russian positions in Syria that complicated American, Israeli, and Turkish air operations despite those nations possessing significant electronic warfare and stealth capabilities. Israel has conducted hundreds of strikes against Iranian targets in Syria since 2015, but Israeli aircraft generally launch standoff weapons from Lebanese or Israeli airspace rather than penetrating Syrian airspace, where S-400 systems operate. This demonstrates how even sophisticated air forces modify operational plans to avoid S-400 engagement envelopes. Expert analysis from the defense community emphasizes the challenge these systems pose. According to Justin Bronk, Senior Research Fellow for Air Power and Technology at the Royal United Services Institute, the S-400 represents a genuine challenge for non-stealth aircraft and even creates complications for fifth-generation stealth platforms. While an F-35 or F-22 maintains significant survivability advantages, the S-400's multiple radar types operating in different frequency bands make detection more likely than against earlier systems. More importantly, the long range and magazine depth mean that even if individual missiles miss, the system can continue engaging, potentially forcing stealth aircraft to expend defensive countermeasures and limit their operational persistence. The question of Russian personnel involvement adds another layer of complexity. Intelligence assessments suggest Russian technicians and advisors almost certainly remain involved in S-400 operations given the system's complexity and the short time frame for Iranian crew training. If Russian personnel are operating these radars or providing targeting data to Iranian operators, any American strike against these systems could result in Russian casualties. This creates potential for direct American-Russian military confrontation that neither government desires, but that could emerge from operational necessity if conflict between the United States and Iran erupts. Moscow's calculations in providing these systems reflect broader Russian strategic interests in the Middle East. Russia benefits from complicating American military freedom of action in the region. It strengthens Russia's position as Iran's security patron, deepening economic and political ties. It demonstrates to other potential customers that Russian weapons systems provide real capability against American power. And it creates leverage over future negotiations about everything from Syria to Ukraine to arms control by establishing Russia as indispensable player in Middle Eastern security dynamics. Beijing's perspective on these deployments also merits consideration. China maintains significant economic interest in Iran as major purchaser of Iranian oil despite American sanctions. China also benefits strategically when American military resources focus on the Middle East rather than the Indo-Pacific. However, China worries about regional instability that could disrupt energy supplies or create refugee flows. Chinese diplomatic statements have emphasized de-escalation while quietly supporting Iranian defensive capabilities. The deployments also affect calculations in Riyadh and Tel Aviv. Saudi Arabia views Iranian military buildup with alarm as the kingdom possesses limited air defense capabilities relative to Iran's growing inventory. The S-400 deployments may accelerate Saudi efforts to acquire more advanced air defense systems from the United States or other suppliers. Israel faces even more direct implications. Israeli military planning has long included potential strike options against Iranian nuclear facilities as last resort if diplomacy fails. The presence of S-400 systems doesn't make such strikes impossible. Israel possesses significant capabilities for suppressing advanced air defenses, but it dramatically increases the complexity, cost, and risk of such operations. Now let me walk you through 3 distinct scenarios for how this situation could develop over the coming weeks, with probability assessments based on current strategic logic and observable indicators. Scenario 1 represents diplomatic de-escalation where the S-400 deployments ultimately function as negotiating leverage rather than preparation for actual conflict. In this scenario, Iran's calculation is that demonstrating enhanced defensive capabilities strengthens its bargaining position in nuclear negotiations by showing that Tehran negotiates from strength rather than weakness. American planners conclude that the increased military complexity of striking Iran makes diplomatic outcomes more attractive, even if they require accepting more limited constraints on Iran's nuclear program than the United States would prefer. Both sides engage in serious negotiations over the coming months, potentially reaching interim agreement that provides Iran with limited sanctions relief in exchange for enhanced monitoring of nuclear facilities and commitments not to enrich uranium beyond certain levels. The S-400 systems remain in place but transition to routine defensive posture rather than crisis deployments. For this scenario to materialize, several conditions must hold. First, hardliners in both Tehran and Washington must not gain political ascendancy that makes compromise politically impossible. Second, no triggering incident, such as attack on American forces or Israeli strikes, can occur that forces immediate military response. Third, both sides must achieve domestic political wins that justify compromise to skeptical audiences. Iran would need to claim that its defensive investments forced American concessions. The United States would need to frame any agreement as preventing Iranian nuclear weapons rather than accepting enrichment capabilities. I assess this scenario at approximately 35% probability. It represents the most rational outcome, given that military conflict serves neither side's core interests. However, the probability remains below 50% because the deployment of advanced weapon systems during diplomatic negotiations signals Iranian skepticism about American good faith, suggesting Tehran may be preparing for conflict rather than seriously pursuing diplomatic resolution. Scenario 2 involves controlled military escalation where limited strikes occur, but both sides work to prevent spiraling into full-scale war. This scenario could unfold through several pathways. Most likely, Israel conducts strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities or weapons convoys in Syria, potentially using advanced standoff weapons launched from outside S-400 engagement ranges. Iran retaliates with missile strikes against Israeli territory or American bases in the Gulf, deliberately limiting casualties to avoid triggering massive retaliation. The United States responds with limited strikes against specific Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps targets, carefully avoiding strikes on air defense systems where Russian personnel might be present. Both sides then pause to assess whether further escalation serves their interests, potentially returning to negotiations with new recognition of escalation risks. This scenario's logic assumes rational actors making careful calculations about escalation thresholds and maintaining communication channels that allow signaling of limits. It requires both sides possessing clear sense of what actions remain acceptable and what actions would trigger uncontrolled escalation. Intelligence assessments suggest both American and Iranian military leadership understand these dynamics and work to prevent full-scale conflict even as political leadership in both countries faces domestic pressure for strong responses to provocations. I assess this scenario at approximately 40% probability, making it slightly more likely than diplomatic de-escalation. The deployment of advanced weapon systems during diplomatic talks suggests Iran anticipates potential military confrontation and is positioning capabilities accordingly. However, the specific positioning of S-400 systems near the Strait of Hormuz rather than around nuclear facilities suggests defensive rather than offensive preparation, indicating Iranian interest in deterring attacks rather than launching them. Scenario 3 represents catastrophic escalation where miscalculation, accident, or deliberate choice leads to large-scale military conflict with regional implications. This nightmare scenario could begin with Iranian proxy forces attacking American positions in Iraq or Syria, killing significant numbers of American personnel. President Trump faces overwhelming domestic pressure for massive retaliation that goes beyond precision strikes to broader campaign against Iranian military infrastructure. Iran interprets American strikes as existential threat to regime survival and responds by launching large-scale missile attacks against American bases across the Gulf region, potentially activating Hezbollah forces against Israel, and attempting to close the Strait of Hormuz to global shipping. Israel conducts its own strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities and Lebanese Hezbollah positions. Within 1 week, the region descends into multi-front conflict drawing in Saudi Arabia, potentially Turkey, and risking direct confrontation between American and Russian forces if Russian personnel operating S-400 systems are killed in American strikes. The escalation chain in this scenario feeds on itself. Each side's response creates new pressure for the other side to escalate further rather than appear weak. Domestic political dynamics in both countries create incentives for leaders to demonstrate resolve rather than restraint. Regional actors with their own grievances and objectives exploit the chaos to pursue their interests, expanding the conflict beyond original American-Iranian confrontation. The most dangerous aspect of this scenario involves the S-400 systems themselves. If American planners conclude these systems must be neutralized to enable air operations, strikes against them risk killing Russian personnel. Russia would face pressure to respond to protect credibility of security commitments to Iran and other partners. Even if Russia limits response to proportional strikes against American interests elsewhere or supplying more advanced weapons to Iran, the precedent of direct American-Russian military exchange creates unpredictable escalation risks that could spread far beyond the Middle East. I assess this scenario at approximately 25% probability. While significant, this remains the least likely outcome because catastrophic escalation serves no actor's genuine strategic interests. Iran cannot win a conventional military conflict against the United States and knows it. The United States has no interest in another prolonged Middle Eastern war that would consume resources needed for strategic competition with China. Russia benefits from regional tension, but not from direct confrontation with American forces. However, a 25% probability of catastrophic escalation is extraordinarily high and should concern anyone monitoring this situation. History demonstrates repeatedly that wars begin not because actors desire them, but because they miscalculate, misperceive intentions, or lose control of escalation dynamics they believe they could manage. Watch for 5 critical indicators over the next 48 to 72 hours that will reveal which scenario is materializing. First, diplomatic communications. If either American or Iranian officials announce scheduling of follow-up talks, or even informal discussions, diplomatic track remains viable and scenario 1 probability increases. Conversely, if either side cancels diplomatic engagement or issues ultimatums, military options move to the forefront. Second, military asset movements. Pay attention to American carrier positioning. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group currently operates in the Arabian Sea. If the carrier enters the Persian Gulf itself rather than remaining in open ocean, this signals offensive posture preparation and increases probability of military action. If the carrier withdraws further into the Indian Ocean, this could indicate decision to avoid escalation or repositioning for long-range strike operations. Watch also for B-2 stealth bomber deployments to Diego Garcia or other regional bases, as this would indicate preparation for strikes against heavily defended targets like S-400 systems. Third, Iranian domestic messaging. Supreme Leader Khamenei's public statements carry enormous weight in Iranian decision-making. If Khamenei delivers major speech in coming days, his language will reveal whether Iran seeks diplomatic off-ramp or prepares population for military confrontation. Look for phrases about strategic patience or dignified negotiations suggesting diplomatic preference versus language about decisive response or teaching aggressors lessons, indicating military preparation. Fourth, Russian positioning. Moscow maintains close intelligence ties with Tehran and likely possesses better information about Iranian intentions than Western services do. If Russia begins evacuating diplomatic personnel from Iran or repositioning forces in Syria, this signals Russian assessment that conflict is imminent. If Russian officials make conciliatory statements or propose mediation, this suggests Russian confidence that situation remains manageable. Fifth, oil market reactions and Strait of Hormuz shipping patterns. Global oil prices immediately reflect market assessment of conflict probability. If prices spike above $90 per barrel, markets are pricing in serious disruption risk. Watch also for changes in commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. If major shipping companies begin rerouting tankers around Africa rather than through the Gulf, this indicates private sector assessment that military conflict is likely enough to justify enormous additional costs of alternative routing. Insurance rates for Gulf shipping will also reflect risk assessment, with significant premium increases signaling elevated conflict probability. These indicators won't provide perfect foresight, but they will show which direction trends are moving. If you see multiple indicators pointing toward escalation rather than de-escalation, the probability of military confrontation increases substantially. If indicators remain mixed or trend toward diplomatic engagement, the situation may stabilize despite current tensions.